My parents served me papers. The house goes to your sister, or we go to court. I responded, all right. Then I filed a countersuit for years of unpaid work. The next day, their lawyer was calling about a misunderstanding. I never thought I'd be sitting across from my parents in a lawyer's office, but there I was, staring at legal papers they'd just slid across the table. The house I'd been living in and maintaining for the past 7 years, the house my grandfather had built with his own hands, was apparently being signed over to my sister. Just like that. We've made our decision, my father said, his voice flat and emotionless. The house goes to your sister, or we go to court. I looked at my mother, expecting to see some hesitation, some acknowledgement of what they were doing. Nothing. Just the same cold stare I'd grown accustomed to over the years. All right, I said simply, gathering the papers. Their lawyer smiled smugly, probably thinking I was going to roll over like I always had. They had no idea what was coming. When my grandfather passed away 7 years ago, the plan had been clear, at least to me. I would move into his house, renovate it, and maintain the property until my parents retired. Then they would move in, and I would get the house in their will. It wasn't a formal agreement, just a family understanding. My sister had never shown interest in the property, having moved across the country for her career. For 7 years, I poured everything into that house. I replaced the roof, updated the electrical, installed new plumbing, and renovated the kitchen and bathrooms. I kept meticulous records of every expense, every hour worked. Not because I didn't trust my parents, but because my grandfather had taught me the value of documenting work. What my parents didn't know was that I'd been consulting with a lawyer friend for the past year. Something in their behavior had changed, subtle comments about my sister's children needing space to grow up, questions about my long-term plans. I'd started to sense that the family understanding was evaporating. So when they served me those papers, I was prepared. The next morning, I filed a countersuit for 7 years of unpaid labor, improvements to the property, and breach of verbal contract. I included every receipt, every before and after photo, every text message discussing the arrangement. I even had witnesses, neighbors who had heard my parents talk about how the house would be mine someday. The phone rang at 8:30 a.m. the following day. Their lawyer, suddenly much less smug, wanted to discuss a misunderstanding. Your parents never intended to cut you out completely, he stammered. They just thought your sister needed. I'll see you in court, I replied, hanging up. By noon, my parents were at my door, technically their door, according to the papers they'd served me. My father looked furious. My mother seemed worried for the first time. What do you think you're doing? My father demanded as I let them in. Exactly what you taught me to do, I replied calmly, standing up for myself. I led them to the dining room table, where I had laid out copies of all my documentation. Years of text messages, emails, and recorded conversations. Photos of me working on the house while they visited, smiling and talking about, when this is yours someday. Bank statements showing the thousands I'd invested. According to 3 different contractors, the work I've done has increased the property value by $167,000, I explained. That doesn't include my labor, which at standard rates would be another $95,000. Then there's the matter of the verbal contract, which... This is ridiculous, my father interrupted. We never signed anything. No, but in this state, verbal contracts are binding, especially when there's substantial evidence of performance on one side. I've been performing my end for 7 years. My mother started crying. We just thought your sister needed it more. She has the kids, and you're single. So I'm less worthy because I don't have children? I asked. Or is it because she's always been the favorite? The truth hung in the air between us. It wasn't about need. My sister and her husband made 3 times what I did. It was about the same dynamic that had defined our family for decades. We'll talk to our lawyer, my father finally said, gathering the papers. I'm sure you will, I replied. And while you're at it, you might want to ask him about the tax implications of the improvements I've made. I've been claiming them on my taxes as investments in a property I would eventually own. That got their attention. The IRS was the one thing my father feared more than confrontation. 3 days later, their lawyer called mine. They wanted to meet. The meeting was set for the following Monday. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, documentation organized in a leather portfolio my grandfather had given me when I graduated college. For important papers, he'd said. He had no idea how important these would be. My parents arrived with their lawyer, looking tired and defeated. My sister was conspicuously absent. We'd like to propose a settlement, their lawyer began. The terms were simple. I would get the house, but would have to buy out my sister's interest in the property, an interest that had never existed until a week ago, for $50,000. In exchange, they would drop all claims. No, I said firmly. I'll counter with this. The house transfers to me immediately, with no buyout. I dropped the labor claims. And we all sign an agreement that this resolves all issues related to the property. Their lawyer started to object, but my father raised his hand. We accept, he said quietly. My mother looked shocked. But what about? It's over, my father interrupted. He's right. The papers were drawn up within the hour. As we all signed, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Years of family dynamics, favoritism, and unspoken expectations had led us here, to a sterile lawyer's office, signing away relationships along with property rights. As we prepared to leave, my mother touched my arm. Will you ever forgive us? She asked, her voice small. I looked at her, then at my father. I don't know, I answered honestly. But the house was never really about the house, was it? They didn't answer. They didn't need to. I drove home, to my home, legally now, and sat on the porch swing my grandfather had built. I pulled out my phone and saw 6 missed calls from my sister. I silenced it and put it away. That conversation could wait. For now, I just wanted to sit in the quiet and process what had happened. I had won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something I hadn't realized was already dying. Update 1. 2 weeks passed before I heard from my sister. She showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning, coffee cups in hand as a peace offering. Can we talk? She asked, standing awkwardly on the porch, my porch. I let her in, accepting the coffee but not the implied truce. We sat at the kitchen table I had refinished myself 3 years ago. They didn't tell me about your arrangement, she started. About you getting the house eventually. They just called one day and said they wanted to put the house in my name for estate planning purposes. I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. I should have called you, she continued. I should have asked if you were okay with it. I just assumed that I'd roll over like always. I finished for her. She had the decency to look ashamed. Something like that. Did you know I've been living here for 7 years, renovating it? I asked. I knew you were staying here, but they made it sound temporary. Like you were just house-sitting until they decided what to do with it. I laughed bitterly. House-sitting for 7 years? While replacing the roof and redoing the kitchen. I haven't been here in 5 years, she admitted. I didn't know the extent of what you'd done. I led her through the house, showing her all the improvements. The master bathroom I'd gutted and rebuilt. The sunroom I'd added off the kitchen. The hardwood floors I'd restored by hand, spending countless weekends sanding and refinishing. This is beautiful, she said, genuinely impressed. You've made it a completely different house. Not different, I corrected. Better. The way Grandpa would have wanted it. We ended up back at the kitchen table. She stared into her now cold coffee. They're devastated, you know, she said finally. Mom cries all the time. Dad won't talk about it. And you? I asked. Are you devastated too? She looked up, meeting my eyes. I'm angry. Not at you, at them. For putting us in this position. For lying to both of us. For the first time in years, I felt like my sister and I were on the same side. Not completely. There was too much history for that. But at least facing in the same direction. What happens now? She asked. I live in my house, I said simply. You live in yours. They figure out their retirement without counting on taking this place over. And us? What happens with us? I considered the question. I don't know yet. But I'm not closing that door. She nodded, understanding that was the best I could offer right now. As she left, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, I would have never accepted the house if I'd known the whole story. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. Thanks for the coffee, I said instead. Update 2. A month later, my parents announced they were selling their house and moving to a retirement community earlier than planned. The message came through my aunt, who called to see if I'd heard the news. They can't afford the house anymore, she explained. Your father's retirement fund took a hit in the market, and they were counting on selling your grandfather's house, your house now, to make up the difference. So that was it. Not just favoritism, but financial desperation disguised as estate planning. They had planned to sell the house out from under me, probably telling themselves they'd make it up to me somehow. I felt a complex mix of vindication and sadness. I was right to protect myself, but the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. That evening, I sat at my desk and calculated the actual value of the improvements I'd made versus what I'd spent. The difference was substantial. I'd created over $100,000 in equity through my own labor. Labor they had planned to pocket without compensation. I drafted an email to my parents. Not apologizing. I had nothing to apologize for, but offering a path forward. I would help them find a reasonable place to retire. I would contribute a fair amount monthly to help with their expenses. Not out of obligation, but because despite everything, they were still my parents. I never sent it. Instead, I called my sister. They were planning to sell it, I said when she answered. The house. That's why they wanted it in your name. A long pause. I know, she finally admitted. I found out last week. Dad let it slip when he was explaining why they're downsizing so suddenly. Were you going to tell me? Another pause. I was trying to figure out how. At least she was honest. It was something. I'm thinking about helping them financially, I said. Not a lot, but something. Why would you do that after what they tried to pull? Because I'm not them, I replied simply. She was quiet for a moment. I can contribute too. We should split it. It was the first genuinely selfless thing she'd offered in our adult relationship. A small step, but significant. Okay, I agreed. We'll figure it out together. Update 3. 6 months later, my parents moved into a modest condo in a 55-plus community about 30 minutes from my house. My sister and I split the down payment as a gift, one with clear boundaries and expectations attached. I invited them over for dinner once they were settled. It was awkward and tense, but it was a start. My father barely spoke. My mother tried too hard, complimenting every little thing as if seeing the house for the first time. The kitchen is lovely, she said, running her hand over the countertop I'd installed. You did all this yourself? Most of it, I replied. I had help with the electrical. It's worth so much more now, my father commented, his first words of the evening. I looked at him directly. It was always worth more than its market value to me. That was the point you missed. He nodded slightly, the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was likely to get. After dinner, as they prepared to leave, my mother handed me a small box. We found this when we were packing, she explained. It should be yours. Inside was my grandfather's pocket watch, the one he always carried. The one I'd admired as a child. The one that should have come to me when he died, but somehow never did. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved despite myself. My father cleared his throat. There's something else. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. It's the deed to the workshop equipment in our old garage. The tools were your grandfather's too. I've been keeping them. They should go with the house. I accepted the envelope, understanding what it cost him to give up those tools. They represented his connection to my grandfather as much as the house did to me. I'll put them to good use, I promised. As they drove away, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take more time, but a willingness to move forward. To build something new from the broken pieces of our family. The next weekend, I started clearing space in the garage for my grandfather's tools. As I worked, I realized I was making room not just for physical objects, but for a different kind of future than I had imagined. One where boundaries were clear, where respect was earned rather than assumed, where family meant something different than it had before. I hung the pocket watch on a nail above what would become my workbench. It seemed right somehow, a reminder of where I came from, but also of how far I'd come. The house was mine now, legally and morally. But more importantly, so was my life. I had stood up for myself, broken the pattern of always giving in, and come out the other side stronger. Not unscathed, but stronger. And that, I realized as I measured the space for my grandfather's old lathe, was worth more than any property deed could ever convey.